What is your name and what are you going to talk about today?
My name is Alison Sharp and I'm here today to talk to you about addiction. My specialist subject is alcohol addiction.
Could you please give me an alcoholic 101?
In terms of defining alcoholism, it is difficult because it's actually a very difficult phrase to use. It is recognised medically now, but basically it's drinking to excess and where it would cause significant problems both to your mental and physical well-being. I would go slightly different to that and say it's not necessarily how much you drink, it's when you're drinking. And it's not the quantity, it's the pattern of your drinking. So I'm not arguing against the definition, but I'm trying to explain that it's not that clear cut. In describing a pattern, most people assume that drinking heavily is evenings and weekends. But in actual fact, you'll find that there's a core of people that will start drinking when they get home from work, for instance, and then really naked all night. In my case, and speaking personally, I just discovered that I had terrible shakes, and the only way to stop the shakes was to have a drink. So in actual fact, I was drinking as I was getting out of bed. I had a bottle of vodka by my bedside. That might sound very extreme, but it was really my way of coping with the day. I literally shook from head to foot, and that was because of my excessive drinking over a very long period of time.
Please give us a brief description about what being an alcoholic has meant to you personally.
I never set out to be an alcoholic. Nobody does set out to have an addiction. For me, it crept up slowly. Looking back in my formative years, I came from a family that were very good at socialising. My father was sort of full of bonhomie. We lived by the River Thames, and so every weekend and bank holidays we had people to the house. And so I was quite used to having drink around me from a very young age. Even in my work, I was a marketing manager, and as such I was sort of courted, if that's a proper word, by advertising agencies and PR agencies who loved to take us out to lunch to look after our business or ensure our business. And therefore having a liquid lunch was not unusual. And I would even be joined by my boss, so it wasn't a question of me sneaking off. Now we are going back into really the late 70s and into the 80s. And so drinking at lunchtime in a work environment was not frowned upon. But I never saw it as a problem. It was very much part of my social life and even my working environment. As time went on, I realised I was getting more dependent to the extent where I literally would come home from work and hardly put my briefcase down on the floor, open the fridge door, and out would come the wine box. Speaking very personally, I found myself in a period of unemployment which wasn't anything to do with my drinking, but I ended up working from home for my husband, and that gave me unlimited access all through the day. My husband actually worked at a business unit, but I was at home by myself, and I think that's what really expedited the fact that I had an opportunity to drink. And then the addiction actually kicked in where I became alcohol dependent, hence the shakes, which needed controlling from my point of view. The negative, it was all negatives when you look back. There's no happy times about when you're drinking. And I found myself, and I know my colleagues will agree with me, we become so devious. You take an active decision that if you've been to one shop one day to buy your alcohol, you make sure you don't go to the same shop for several days afterwards in case the staff recognise you. And I used to take great delight if a new shop had opened that was selling alcohol. But I do it with a smile on my face because we do have some very strange habits in terms of storing our alcohol. The gentlemen mainly hide their alcohol in their man cave, often the shed. We'll go to great lengths to conceal it in a false cupboard or something like that. Us girls perhaps a bit more open, and it's the laundry basket. We become very, very protective of what goes in terms of laundry into the laundry basket, knowing full well there's probably some bottles at the bottom of it. But looking back, I didn't like myself at all. I've just mentioned I was deceitful. You lie about how much you're drinking, you lie about how much you're spending on drinking, you're cheating, you're not being a very nice person at all. very extreme cases, they can end up having to finance their addiction with stealing to find money and that sort of thing. I must admit I didn't go down that route. But when one considers that this is on your mind from the moment they wake up, where's my next bottle? Have I got enough to last me through? When can I get to the shops? We are not very nice people in ourselves, and we do lose our self-confidence. I found that I didn't even like looking at myself in the mirror because my skin didn't look good, my hair was all over the place. I had no pride in my appearance, and I lost my self-confidence. And that is the consequence of being addicted, be it alcohol or any addiction at all. It's not a very nice place to be.
How did alcohol affect you growing up?
My parents found it acceptable to have wine with our Sunday lunch. And I was perhaps about 14, and they meant me no harm at all, but for me it was being grown up, that whilst they were having a drink, I was grown up enough to join them. And having said that, I can actually remember having my first alcoholic drink. I think I was a little bit younger, I was 12, Christmas time. Dad was making my grandma a snowball, which is apricot and lemonade, not particularly alcoholic drink. But I remember getting a nice warm fuzzy feeling after that. And again, it was being grown up, having a snowball, just like Grandma. And I almost remember thinking, oh, I can't wait till next Christmas when I can have it again. So that is really the beginnings of my sort of experience of alcohol. My father joined a sailing club, and it was quite normal that after we'd finished sailings and put the boats away, we'd all troop into the bar. Now, admittedly, it was half a lager and lime, but that was me being part of the gang, again, getting identification perhaps with the grown-ups. Nobody turned a blind eye, the fact that I was perhaps only 15 or 16, but there I was having a glass of lager after we'd finished sailing. So my introduction was quite young and very acceptable, that I was just being part of my family and social culture. It was just part of the norm.
Have you felt you've been marginalised or stereotypes due to struggling with alcoholism?
I can honestly say I don't believe I have personally, but I am aware that as a group there is a concept that to be an alcoholic you live on a park bench. And I've actually got a couple of instances where people have said, well, I can't be an alcoholic because I've got a beautiful home and I drive a flashy car. That's not true at all. It can affect anybody. I've got some friends who hold very senior positions in large organisations. So the concept of you being a down and out and having to live on a park bench is far, far, far from the truth.
Has this ever happened at the university, or have you felt quite accepted?
I felt very, very accepted. The staff have been absolutely wonderful, and I've had only one opportunity to speak with the students, and they've listened with great interest to my story and when I explain my background. And I'm particularly with the students and those who are going into social work or nursing, ask them to be very considerate and give their own self-assessment of being judgmental. It's so easy to make an assumption when in actual fact people who have addiction problems need help. We're very lonely, we're very isolated. One thinks of people who drink heavily as that being the life and soul of the party, but in actual fact when you're back in your own domain, in your own environment, it is lonely and isolating. You don't feel very, you have no self-confidence in yourself. You're just taken over by the addiction. Your overwhelming thought is to get to that drug of choice or that bottle of alcohol from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep.
Could you do some myth busting about stereotypes surrounding alcoholism?
We have two types of alcoholic. There's something called a functional alcoholic and a binge drinker. Now, binge drinkers, they can go weeks and weeks without a drink, and then all of a sudden, over a very short space of time, maybe 2 or 3 days, they drink and drink and drink till they are absolutely laid low and very ill. Now, in that situation, it would possibly affect any sort of life and work for them, because they really are, knocked out completely and physically sick and ill. So that would probably encroach on any work commitments. The other side of the coin are those like myself who are functional alcoholics. We can carry on because we just have a sort of top up each day. So we have a possibly level of alcohol that's in our system the whole time, and all we're doing is just topping it up. Now, we function. We can go to work, we can go shopping, we can go swimming, we can go to the gym. It might be noticeable that we're perhaps not on top form, and admittedly sometimes we do take the odd day off, but I maintain you can hold down a position of quite responsibility and carry on as normal.
How can alcoholism affect one person in a family and not another?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I have a younger brother who was exposed to the same background as myself, and he can have a drink and has no problem at all. Looking back, I think possibly my grandfather perhaps showed signs of alcoholism, if you can call it that. But I do believe there's something called a wonky gene that can just creep into one member of a family. That is not the least bit medical, but to my mind it proves that there's something in one element of your gene makeup that just sparks off this desire for the addiction. And the whole point about the addiction is you can't just have one drink and put it down. And that defines, in some respects, not necessarily being an alcoholic, but having an addiction that says you just have to go on and on and on. And it is very applicable to me. And I was very fortunate that my husband understood that. Perhaps I didn't, but he did. And so I had all the support in the world.
So how could the people around you and the university do better?
I think the important thing is to recognise it can happen to anybody, and that we do need help. Admitting that you do have a problem is the first and the stumbling block. It's easy to say, well, I drink too much and I have terrible hangovers. But when it gets to affecting your life, you're continually thinking, where am I going to get my next drink from? Help is out there. It's just admitting to yourself that you do have a problem. If you're in the Hull area, there's an organisation called Renew, and if you're in the surrounding area of East Riding, it's the East Riding Partnership, and they have a formal system of being able to assist and can find you places when it comes to it for detoxification and subsequently rehab. It is also a question of just getting support and finding perhaps organisations such as Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous. You also have an organisation called SMART, S-M-A-R-T, and that can be found online. And having said that, there is a lot of online support you can get just by going through the usual search engines. But I do really recommend that you find an organisation and get some identification, because that feeling of relief, finding that you're not alone, you're not the only one that hides the bottles in the laundry basket or go to different shops on different days. There is a lot of help from those of us that have been through it, and we can offer a lot of advice and rebuild your confidence that you're not alone.
How do you feel the media represents alcoholics?
I think the media is getting a little bit more sympathetic. You have to be living on a park bench to be an alcoholic must come from the media. But I do believe very, very strongly that it is becoming more recognised, that it is a national, not a problem so much as it affects us all. And I'm sure when they look around their own newsroom, they'll see that there are many people in there themselves that are questioning, do I have a problem with alcohol, or perhaps am I abusing prescription medication? And that's what's needed. It's a recognition that this is something that can affect anybody, no matter male, female, age, race, religion. Doesn't matter who you are. Addiction, alcoholism doesn't discriminate.
Is there anything else you would like to say, or anything you would like anyone to know about alcoholism?
A very important point that I would like to make is that addiction, as I say, be it alcoholism or prescription medicine, it's not a question of being weak-willed and losing control. It is something which becomes a part of your life, and that it takes recognition that if you do have a problem. But it's certainly not a question of, well, why can't you just stop, or why can't you just have one? That is the attitude of a lot of people, and it's where perhaps the media can help, or better in education, that it is a form of disease and should be treated as such. Most common form of detoxification is to be admitted into a clinic away from everybody else, away from all the distractions. After that week, you're back in the outside world, or if you choose, you can go into a rehab. That's when the real hard work comes, because you then have to deal with your cravings and your urges. The actual physical need for the alcohol has been taken from you because of the equilibrium, but it's then getting back into the outside world. And that's where counselling and again contact with other people can help, because you do have to retrain your thinking, and as the weeks and months go by, it makes it easier. I'm very proud to say I now have over 6 years sobriety, but that little devil still sits on my shoulder. When I least expect it, it will whisper in my ear, "Go on, one won't hurt," but one will hurt, and I will be back right where I was. In fact, it is noted, and I've experienced myself, after a period of sobriety, if you do start drinking again, you go back drinking with a vengeance. It's almost as if you're making up, or there's a guilt feeling that you're doing it. So you actually go back to consuming more than you were originally. Horrible, horrible disease.